Aloha, I'm Shaun Lether, and I'm here to tell you about my series of near-death experiences and other spiritually transformative experiences that brought me to where I am today. I was born in Salt Lake City to an LDS family. Somehow before birth, I knew that I was going to have a very challenging life full of all kinds of extremes, lots of highs, but mostly lows and challenges. I knew that through the pain and the dark nights that I was going to somehow discover my purpose in life. And now as I look back and I understand more, I remember that I basically have had this mantra through most of my life: I'm not ready. I'm not ready. And that feeling was so strong when I was in utero, I guess, with my mother, and she was pregnant, that I really remember wanting to back out of this. And my poor mother had other thoughts, and they induced labor. And so I was born reluctantly. I really did not. I had second thoughts about the life that I had chosen. Anyway, so I was born into an LDS family, but we were what many people would call Jack Mormons. We believed in the church. My parents believed in the church, but didn't necessarily adhere to all the principles. From the earliest of birth, I've had lung issues and immune system issues and physical challenges. And so when I was 6 months old, they were sure that I was going to die, and I was put in the ICU in an oxygen tent. And that was the first near-death experience that I had. I don't remember the details of that experience, but what I do know is that from then on, I had this deep connection with the divine. I had what, people talk about all the flares. I was able to see things before they happened. And I had this intense connection with other people where I could feel their feelings and know things about them before they even knew. I've always had this feeling that I'm being guided over, watched over, and from the earliest age, I was in prayer. And I remember as a kid that I had this deep connection, and even before I remember being taught to pray, I was praying. However, I grew up in a very dysfunctional family where a lot of feelings were stuffed and not acknowledged, and there was a lot of pain and abuse. And so I stopped at some point trusting a lot of what I knew and my knowing. And that happened because I would see things as a young kid. We were coming home from Lake Powell one time, and I was maybe 7, and I had this vision that our boat was going to be robbed. And my dad didn't believe me, nobody else believed me, and we were in this restaurant, and we went out later after eating, and sure enough, everything had been stolen out of our boat. And that sort of thing started happening to me more and more. And one time we had moved from Salt Lake City to a place called Alpine Highland, and we were building this big pond, and they were digging out the dirt from the pond, and they were moving it to the back of the property, and we had this giant dump truck. And as the dump truck got ready to dump the dirt in the back of the property, I immediately had this vision that it was going to tip over. And I kept trying to warn everybody, my dad and the dump truck operator, and nobody listened. But I grabbed my little sister and hurried and moved her out of the way. And sure enough, the dump truck tipped over, and where we were standing is where it crashed. So we would have been killed. Another time we had this big barn that was huge, several $100,000 barn. And I had a vision that it was going to burn down. And again, told my dad that I saw what was going to happen, and was ignored. And sure enough, the barn did burn down, and several $100,000 in loss. Well, because of all these things were happening, but the people that I loved the most were not able at the time to validate what was going on. I stopped trusting myself, and I stopped trusting my intuition and my inner guidance system. And I also started experiencing, because of the abuse in the household, these dark entities that would be above my bed and in my room at night. As a 8, 9, 10-year-old kid, this was really traumatic, and I didn't really have anywhere to turn. But I did have that relationship with God, and I basically remembered that in the church that we could, or what I was taught was to say, in the name of Jesus Christ, I command you to be gone. And through a period of doing that, I never actually saw these dark entities again. I stayed in that house and the family for a few more years, having these spiritual experiences, but not really having them validated with my family. And my mom taught me all kinds of esoteric practices. At 12, 13, we went and learned how to do first remote viewing, and then we learned how to do astral projection. And she was clearly not your typical Mormon mom, but somehow she had this connection to all of this stuff and the other side that would prove to be very helpful to me as I got older. When I was 18, I moved from Utah to California. I lived in Los Angeles for a period of time, and I had this hugely spiritual connection, but I also had a very materialistic connection with the illusory trappings of money and all of that in our society. And something in me guided me to move to Santa Barbara. I had moved to Los Angeles to be an actor because I'd always loved doing acting and modeling and magic and everything in Salt Lake City. And something guided me to move to Montecito, California. And I, again, was experienced the most amazing part of the illusory world with these giant estates and so forth. But I realized I wasn't happy. And that's when I was guided to start to go to college. And I started studying comparative world religions. You know, they talk about gurus, and I met my version of a guru. She was an Indian Brahmin she was Oxford educated from India. And this woman opened up my whole world and taught me about the earliest religions and how they were all, formed and came about, and the similarities between all of them. And I started studying philosophy and Vedanta, and that's when I was introduced to A Course in Miracles. I had what was kind of my first spiritual awakening there in Santa Barbara. What happened is I'd been studying all of these different spiritual practices and learning meditation. I was at a Trader Joe's, I parked in the parking lot, and I got out of the car and I spit out my gum, and I spit it out, and it, went on the asphalt in the parking lot. And that was the first time I heard the voice. And even though I'd had this connection younger, it wasn't a voice that was loud. And so this was the first time that I experienced the voice, more of a commanding, but loving, but commanding and stern. And the voice said, pick it up. And I literally didn't even believe what I just heard. So I started to walk more towards the door, and I heard the voice again say, pick it up. I stopped for a second, questioned myself, and then I kept walking to the door. By the time I got to the door, the voice was really loud. It was still loving, but it was very stern, and said, pick it up. So I went back to the car. I picked up the piece of gum off the asphalt, and I stuck it in, put it in the trash. And the voice said, how are you going to do the big things if you can't do the little things? And that was the first time when I truly understood this guidance system that I have, that we all have. It was a pretty amazing experience. But I still, because of my self-image issues and my need for validation and other unworthiness issues, I still had to go to college, and I had to get all these business degrees, and I got 4 degrees and graduated with honors. And then I went on to have several successful companies, but I had a landscape company, and then I started buying real estate. And I had everything by the time I was 35, that this world says that you should have. And I was in Big Bear Lake, California, and I just had a really successful year. And we were all going to be coming to my house for Christmas there. And for me, growing up in Utah, I love snow at Christmas. It's not Christmas without snow. And I was trying to recreate the childhood Christmases that I didn't really have because of all the drama and fighting as a child in this house in Big Bear. And I had everything that I could imagine. I just put in all new biking appliances, and I had a brand new Hummer, and I just put in satellite radio and everything that you could want. And or the world says that we should want. And I got up early, and there was snow out on the ground, and my family was coming for Christmas, and I was so excited. And I got in my Hummer, and I started riding around the lake there. And I put in the song Believe by Cher. And I was listening to that song, and all of a sudden I realized that I had everything that the world says we should have. And it's snowing on Christmas. I mean, how could it be any better? But I wasn't happy. And I believe that I put in motion a series of events that were going to literally bring me to happiness. But it was going to involve losing everything that I thought meant something to me in this world, and to me, what I consider a dream now. So that was in December of 2003. By February of 2004, I was flying to Hawaii, and I had decided that I was going to buy some real estate there on the Big Island. The minute the plane took off, I had an abdominal hernia because I had done acting and modeling, and on top of having the house and the money and everything, I was also having the perfect body that we think that we should have to be accepted. And as a result of doing a lot of weight training without a hernia belt, I developed an abdominal hernia. And I would joke, because I didn't know how serious they are, but but I, had an 8-pack, because I had this, or 7-pack, because I had an extra bump, which was my hernia. Well, it started to strangulate on the plane from Los Angeles to Honolulu, and I didn't know what was going on. I didn't know how bad it was. And so the whole flight over was miserable. Stayed in Honolulu for a day or so, miserable, in pain, and throwing up, nauseous. Had no idea still what was happening. I went to the Big Island, and back then I didn't do Western medicine because of growing up with chronic illnesses and asthma and bronchitis and pneumonia and all this stuff. When I was living in Santa Barbara, I'd gotten on all natural homeopathic medicines or herbs and everything. So as we went to the Big Island, and I went to a homeopathic doctor who probably should have known that because my chest was turning black and blue that I was dying inside, but she didn't know. And I gave it another day or so. Most people die within 48 hours of an abdominal hernia strangulating like mine, but I went about 70 something hours. And by the time I got to the emergency, they knew exactly what was wrong with me. As they were taking me into the emergency room, operating room. And that's when I started realizing that I was dying. And I was feeling everything slipping away from me. And all of a sudden, I entered into this dark void kind of place. And at some point, I realized that I was dying. And I also knew that I couldn't die, like I couldn't accept it, and I wasn't going to accept it. And I found myself with, at that point, I don't know that it was God or who it was. All I knew is that I was arguing that I can't die now. I won't accept that I am going to die. I don't even know how I knew what I did, but I knew that I wasn't going to accept it. And I knew that I would be a spirit that didn't accept their death. And I would be haunting this hospital in Hilo, and nobody's going to find me. I kept seeing this tunnel of light, and all I knew is stay away from that. And before I knew it, I did go to the light. And the next thing I remember is I woke up after this emergency surgery. My stomach was cut open, of course, and it was 7 feet of necrotic intestines were removed. I had a major change in me, but it wasn't as profound as what was going to later happen in 2018. But I woke up in the hospital room, and they told me that I couldn't leave for 6 months because they had to leave my stomach open because it was all bacteria. And so I said, well, if I have to stay, I want to recover by a waterfall. And sure enough, the next day in Homes and Land magazine, there was a property with 3 houses, its own private waterfall, and private river, several waterfalls, and everything you could actually imagine. The most amazing, beautiful place. And when I got out of the hospital, like 10 or 15 days later, I went to rent that place, and then later purchased it from the lady. I never went back to California. My partner and people that I knew at the time, they went back and sold all my real estate. And that's when I started. This was in 2004. And that's when I started. I had some amazing, beautiful experiences, but I also somehow had this knowing that I was going through a huge process, that I was gonna pretty much lose everything that I'd spent all these years working. And this voice, again, the voice that I had heard in the Trader Joe's parking lot, told me to get ready. And the weird thing is I knew what the voice meant, but I wasn't listening. And what the voice meant when it said get ready is your spiritual practice. Get spiritually strong, reading certain books that have been very helpful for me. For about 2 years, I was literally having amazing experiences happening, but I also knew that this voice had told me get ready. And so the land values went up. Steven Spielberg, they did the Indiana Jones Kingdom of the Crystal Skull at my property. I got to meet the most amazing people in my life, all of the cast of Indiana Jones and all those actors. And then of course, the most amazing directors and Steven Spielberg and George Lucas. And so I was having this amazing experience. And in the back of my mind, though, I knew that all of this is going to go away, and that it had to, for me, for my growth. Everything that I valued in this illusory world had to go away. And I did not understand why, but I knew it was going to happen. And that's when I started experiencing what they call a dark night of the soul, without even realizing that that's what was happening. So the financial collapse started in 2008, and all of my real estate that had skyrocketed was collapsing immediately, because I also live on an island with the world's most active volcano, and it's also tsunami territory and so forth. And so the land values, everything just dropped. Nothing that I owned was worth anything that it had been. Back then I was praying, and I'm praying to save all my real estate or get me a buyer or get me a loan, and nothing was working. And in the past, I'd made all this money and it was really easy. And now nothing is working. Like thing after thing that could go wrong, everything that could, it did. And so all of a sudden, that guidance system that I'd counted on most of my life is gone. I couldn't hear. At least I thought I was gone. So in 2011, I pretty much walked away from everything. All my furniture, my cars, my animals, everything. I either lost it or gave it away and walked away. Somehow I knew that I had to be free of all of that in order to truly wake up. And so that's when I moved in with this crazy, I call crazy, because my life had been about money and illusion and everything before, but I moved into what I call this crazy healer lady. And she opened my world to all of these different healing modalities and just so much that I had never, even though I'd experienced some with my mom, stuff that I would never have believed that I would learn. So in 2012, I was living with her, and I did this exercise where everything that I had, because most of it was gone, through foreclosure and bank collapses and just everything. And my relationship ended. I left the property with literally a trash bag of stuff. Everything that my Christmas ornaments for my mother, all my sentimental stuff, everything I walked away from. And in 2012, I did this burning exercise that It was as if everything I'd cared about was destroyed and gone. And I mean, it really was, but I was doing this mental kind of cleansing exercise to help me release the attachment that I had to all of these possessions and so forth. For the next year or so, I really deepened my spirituality and started learning about these different healing modalities and so forth. And I was guided to, as I mentioned, when I was a kid, we first learned how to do remote viewing and then astral projection. And so I would go lay on the lanai at the house that I was living in, and I would just leave my body and I would levitate. And I don't know why I was guided to, well, I do now, but I did not know then why I was guided to do this. And so it was a practice that I worked on, and I was not consciously, but more unconsciously developing my spiritual practices that the voice had told me when it said, get ready, that I had done before. And so then in 2013, I left the Big Island and I moved to Oahu, to Honolulu. I still had a lot of healing that I had to do and a lot of letting go of this material world. And I now realize that it's like the layers of the onion. I had to literally get rid of everything that tethered me to this dream, to this world, in order for me to gain everything of the true world.